Welcome to Know Your Food, the podcast where we explore the world of food by speaking with farmers, makers, entrepreneurs, and experts who are reshaping how we think about what we eat. I'm your host, Michael Ray Robinoff, CEO and co-founder of Farm to People, and we're recording these conversations live from our warehouse in Bushwick, Brooklyn. In today's episode, I sit down with Qiana Mickie, Executive Director of the NYC Mayor's Office of Urban Agriculture, and a longtime advocate for food justice, land stewardship, and equitable food systems. From leading policy initiatives to supporting community-led agriculture, Qiana has worked at the intersection of environment, economy, and equity for over a decade. We discuss the critical role of urban farming in building resilient cities, how municipal policy can support regional food networks, and what it means to center justice in food systems both rural and urban. This is a powerful, wide-ranging conversation that brings a grounded perspective to questions of food sovereignty, access, and the future of farming in and around New York City. Thanks for listening to Know Your Food. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a review and share it with a friend. And now, here's my conversation with Qiana Mickie. Thank you so much, Qiana, for joining us tonight at Farm to People. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate being here.
I always like to start, a little bit more and hearing a little bit more about your story. So what first sparked your interest in food, and how did you get into food to begin with before it led to your path to sort of be in the Mayor's Office of Urban Agriculture?
I think for me, one of the earliest points around food was really when I was going through my own health issues and journey. I was a young mother, so I had a young son, and I started having health issues. I think a lot of it was connected to stress. I think this was also an opportune time where it was the era of Supersize Me and Omnivore's Dilemma had come out. So it was really this conversation around food and local food and thinking about food a little bit more. And personally, I had to really think about what I was eating. And then having a young son, thinking about what I was bringing home. So to me, I had to start from basics. So all the things I was used to eating, especially right out of college, fast food, processed food, things like that, just my body started rejecting. On the other, and also now having a son, I wanted to bring in healthier food, not just for myself, but for him too. So I started thinking about food. But then the information around local food and knowing about farmers or learning about farmers gave me the opportunity to also think about the ecosystem we live in. Yes, the natural environment, but also the people in this network. I've always had a desire to volunteer. So it just all kind of seemed to be connected. At that point, I had moved to Harlem. I started seeing the difference of food access and disparities in terms of where I grew up in the Bronx versus what I was able to now have access to in Harlem. It was my first foray into the community-supported agriculture world, CSA, and volunteering around food. There were a lot of pop-up markets. So it really started for me around an intimate connection with farmers in our region, thinking about what I was actually eating, where I was getting it from. But then I started to realize that not everybody had the same opportunities and access. And then this all happened around the same time, and then I started a community advocacy training course at Just Food. So I started as this volunteer, had the opportunity to training, and that connected what I was thinking about personally to a system, right, a CSA system, and then finding out about terminologies like food sovereignty and food justice. That was also when I first learned about the Farm Bill. So all of that started to really, it wasn't working at this time, so it also started connecting to what's next and what do I want to do and how can I make a difference? It just started to feel like maybe the food system was that way. Now, how that kind of moves forward was I had continued to want to volunteer, started doing work around grassroots policy, food and farm policy, and wanting to break it down so everybody could have that understanding as I was learning too. Because I realized if that was my way to give back, I could learn as I'm going, challenge myself, but also maybe bring it back to my communities. These were also elements and things and policies that I wasn't familiar with either. So all of that just wanting to build impact. And I think that's what has brought me to the work here, was from a community level to wanting to do it in a nonprofit level. I eventually started working at Just Food. I've had a few jobs over time. I eventually became the executive director. So it's always been around building community impact, building change. And when the opportunity for the office came around, fortunately, it had been about 10 years at that point of doing this work and really scaling from community-based work to policy work to making it my livelihood. There was a certain point where it was like, I want to do this for a living. And then with the office, I was a little daunting to take on a first ever office, a first ever role. So you're starting from scratch. But I think because I had when I came back to Just Food, or when I started working at Just Food as executive director, it was a turning point. And so I had that desire to want to see impact at that level. The opportunity of working in the city created this blank canvas of bringing in community, businesses, farmers, students, elders, like all the networks that already made our urban agriculture, our history, our rich history, our stories already here. It was a way to bring that into a city structure and leverage city assets. And it sounded like the challenge of a lifetime at that point, and a way to really demonstrate new impact, new ways, new changes. So
has it turned into what, like, I guess now almost 4 years in, has it turned out to be what you expected? And if so, how? And if not, how?
Yeah. So it does feel like 4 years. It's only been 2.5, but it definitely some days feels like 4, some days it feels like 10. But yes, I feel like I didn't know what to expect other than challenges and adversity. I think being a woman of color, particularly a Black woman of color, being an emerging leader, oftentimes I have said in the past, like, we're given Titanics, we're not given cruise ships. And I did walk in wondering, how does one start a new role? And how do I get set up for success? I think there were a lot of challenges with that kind of made me nervous, right? But I also, again, saw the challenge. So all that to say, I think I didn't know what to expect, but I knew it was going to have some adversity. I think I came in knowing we were going to have a very interesting administration. Mm-hmm. I was appointed by Mayor Eric Adams, and I was so when I got in, it was about 1.5 years into the administration. So we knew where it was. We knew he had a passion in food and agriculture. So that was interesting. I think also for me, just this opportunity of seeing where the food movement was in the city and being able to kind of connect policy to urban ag. So what I found out in the office when I started running was, one, yes, there was nothing there. It was a way to start, but I didn't want to just start from what I knew from my work and my history. I wanted to really see myself as a public leader and really take my mandate, not just seriously, but in an innovative way, because I felt like it was the administration for innovation and a time for that. So thinking of that equity lens around environmental, racial, and economic, and how we can create just inclusion for all. How can nature-based innovation, nature-based solutions come into a city? And again, how can the city move it? So it became like, I guess, the challenge of learning how to move in a city bureaucracy, at the same time dealing with personal adversity, because not everybody really understood urban ag. Even now in city agencies or in the city knew what to make of a food system, especially trying to incorporate urban agriculture.
I think that's like a really good segue to the fact that, as you mentioned, this is the first office of its kind. It's the first, you were the inaugural leader of the Mayor's Office of Urban Agriculture. How did the office come to be, and was it made with you in mind? That's one question.
I'd like to think so.
And also, like, you mentioned the mandate or the mission. What is the mission for that office into the future?
Yeah, help me if I forget on my journey to answering the question. But I think there's a lot that I want to share here.
Please.
One, I often say that the evolution of the office, the desire to have an office of urban ag in New York City, really came by parallel movements and energy and advocacy. One, you had the community groups, this long history of urban ag in our 5 boroughs and our connections to our rural farmers. So you had folks that wanted to see the city reach a more potential around creating more opportunities around resources, access to land, access to food production, just access to wellness spaces and healing, and having the autonomy to do that from the community aspects, where maybe our existing agencies, their mandates had gone to a certain point and they wanted to do more. They felt like there could be more here. So more growing, more producing, more activation on land, maybe new ways to approach urban agriculture. On the other side, you had the ag tech field, or folks that were doing it probably in more of a for-profit basis, more resource, had lobbyists. And when I say ag tech, in the breadth of ag tech, in where that could be hydroponic, aquaponic, vertical farming, controlled environment. So you had these unique approaches to agriculture, but saying, hey, New York City, we're a growing force, but it doesn't seem like the city's really able to engage us in a way that would really foster us. And yet we're here in the city doing great work. I think electeds at the time were listening to that, the beat of these parallel drums. When it came to a head was actually at a hearing where community members found out about the hearing and the ag tech folks were there. And then you started to realize here are these two movements that had some commonality, but also had some differences, and how an office could really support it. So I think that's really where the advocacy for the office came to be, as well as the vision and leadership of electeds at the time, like Council Member Raphael Espinal and former borough president, now Mayor Eric Adams, where they saw that there was a need and opportunity to bring to the forefront food and agriculture in a way that would really meet city needs. In terms of me getting the job, I think it worked like, a lot of jobs. I'm sure they had like a long list and then a short list. I'm sure they talked to different people about what an office of urban ag could or should be. Again, I'd love to think I was in their mind all along, and all my years of doing advocacy and, working and submitting testimony at hearings and saying like urban agriculture should be also climate resiliency. It needs to be in its own office where it can get fundraising and really be seen as something that is emerging, but also resilient. And I also felt early on in my early advocacy days that an office of urban ag needed to be engaged in the community, engaged in research, and engaged with moving the city on how to inform priorities that we've been missing. So of course, I'd like to think that all of that, somebody was, we gotta check this lady out. But to say, I interviewed like other folks that I would imagine had interviewed as well, and then got the call.
Got it. You were definitely on the short list, 100%.
I'd like to think so.
Going to the point of resilience, which I think is a really, really important one, and also I think interesting, this dichotomy of ag tech and I guess soil-based farming, this other type of farming. When you look at urban ag through the perspective of resilience, do you look at it both from the lens of feeding New Yorkers, which seems the obvious way to look at it? It's where you're producing food theoretically. But on the flip side, I think there's there's a lot more of a focus on and a push towards green cities and getting more agriculture onto roofs or into parks or maintaining parks, I think is a critical issue. What lens are you seeing as more of the focus? And I guess ag tech, the reason I bring that in is ag tech to me feels like it's solving more the food access and part of it, but not necessarily the green spaces or that part. Also, addendum to that on the food side is, and people have talked about this even from, Brooklyn Grange, who I know them very well and love the food, but people always are like, is that food okay to eat? Is there a part of growing in an urban environment that maybe makes food more or less safe? And whether, again, they're on a roof, they're bringing soil in from upstate. If it's in a park
Yeah.
where the soil is like in the ground and may have contaminants from the past. So talk about, there's a lot of questions and I can repeat them.
Oh, sure. Thank you. No, I'm glad that you put it all together because it also helps remind me to explain how I got to the mission of the office is. So as you can hear and you can see, and I'm sure you all see in your own lives, that oftentimes our first interaction with climate, with our urban green space, the living space that you have, is one, eating, because we all eat, and also just the access you have or don't have in our boroughs, in our, where we're at. And there's all these intersections: food, scaled food, food production, growing food for hobby, growing food for education, climate, resiliency. So when taking on the office, I realized I can't just, again, look at it as just of the work that I've done before, and I can't just only think about business. It really had to be an office that was trying to support the growth and the breadth of urban agriculture and creating a space for New York City for both to thrive. But we can't disavow, or we can't ignore that we have economic inequities, environment inequities, wealth inequities, health inequities. So for me, part of building the mission, and let me take a step back. The office did start in city charter. So city council established a charter to establish the Office of Urban Agriculture. It's enacted for the mayor to appoint an executive director. So that's kind of how those two kind of work together. I know oftentimes people ask. So with that, there was a mandate, and there's a mandate and it's on the website, but basically it was trying to find a way to bridge those two. So my job was really how to meet that mandate, but I also saw there was just opportunities where there were ways to weave it. So meaning, how can we increase the access to and the production of locally grown food? How do we strengthen linkages on not just our hyper-local system, but how do we strengthen the linkages to our regional system? We already have mayor offices and agencies that are mandated to protect and keep our green spaces green and accessible. We already have agency and mayoral offices that are supposed to work on municipal food policy, but with that, the food that already comes into the city, but what was missing was how to bridge what community members want to grow and how people can grow for scale and still create opportunities that speak to farmers, small-scale farmers, medium-scale farmers, in particular, because oftentimes those are not the folks in our city procurement. Oftentimes those are not the folks getting the resources. So to me, it was and having a background in food and policy, it created the opportunity to say, we can support what's here and happening hyper-locally, but the reality is we are as strong to our bounty and to our region and to our state. And we need to strengthen those relationships with farmers and producers as well. If they're growing well, that means our food is going to be grown well. If they're tending to the land and stewarding well, just like we're encouraging land stewards here to do it safely and environmentally and climate smart, then we need to also find a way to support our rural farmers in that as well. And then lastly, how to spur or minimize the city's contribution to climate crisis. We oftentimes talk about food waste, but we don't always talk about solutions that can be community-based or scaled. Oftentimes, we also don't talk about how urban agriculture has solutions around that too. And we can talk more about that as well. Like, how do we grow food? How do we harvest food? How do we use the full item? And to me, that's the beauty, and what I hope I'm bringing to the Office of Urban Ag was not just meeting the mandate, tell us how, urban ag data, period. It's like, no, New Yorkers should be telling us what urban ag is in New York City. So that's how we're going to grow it. That's how it thrives. But also that connection between food and climate was missing. And still work to be done, I would say, I think, for us all in the city to do that work. Like, we have climate crisis. We have to deal with climate crisis. Can urban ag be a solution or a part of the solution? Mm-hmm. That to me was part of the office mandate. Well, that was part of the office mission in order to meet our mandate, was to do that. How do we spur economic opportunities for all, especially folks that do not get those opportunities and resources? How do we minimize the city's contribution to climate chaos or environmental injustice in the work that we do around food and ag?
Yeah.
So to me, it kind of helped. There's a more succinct mission on the website, but it was really trying to, all the things you lifted, how to bring that all together was a way to say there's a breadth of urban ag here. We still have yet to scratch the potential of it. It does involve nature-based solutions. It does involve innovation, but innovation shouldn't be synonymous with just ag tech. It shouldn't be just, you said, models that are here for food access and for business, but there are ways that we can actually bring the both and to it. And that's what I find the most exciting part about the job, is been trying to bring that to life, is supporting and protecting community gardens and urban spaces we already have, continuing to support them and trying to get them resources to do the educational work, finding new ways to activate, bring other folks to that site. One of the initiatives we have is like reimagining farm to school in New York City. Never had there been a project or initiative that was focused on connecting students to community gardens during their class day. So they got to see the livelihood of an urban farmer, urban gardener. So that's work that's happening within their neighborhood, walking distance.
Totally. And beyond that, I think something that's really palpable and powerful is when you see a kid for kind of the first time seeing something grow in its original self and being like, you can eat that. I think there's something that we don't realize has become a very privileged thing, to know where your food comes from and how it's grown, which urban farms, especially in a city of 8 million, where unfortunately many of our kids in the city will not necessarily be exposed to a local farm upstate or something like that. So the city is a real opportunity for them to encounter this. And then I think what's great is it also then sparks that curiosity to eat it, and that changes health.
Exactly. Part of what we need is to share the knowledge that we have around agriculture with our younger people. But again, that connection to food has to start with meeting them where they're at, so they understand where food is grown. That food can be grown in the 5 boroughs. It doesn't just come from grocery stores. And also that agriculture isn't novel. Oftentimes, projects are often created in a way where, whether intentionally or otherwise, it makes it almost seem like a garden or a farm is like going to Six Flags or like Great Adventures if you grew up in the around the fibro, where it's like, oh my God, I went and then I got a funnel cake and then I went home. Like somebody gave me a carrot and then I went home. It's not gonna create those synapses. They're not gonna see themselves as climate stewards. They're not gonna wanna make that change in their neighborhood if they don't understand that food can be grown in different ways and also here. And I think the other part of it too is, for a lot of New Yorkers, it's important to also see the cultural relevancy of food, that our microclimate can also be conducive to growing seasonal and native crops, but also things from our own cultures, and that you can have that here. So you don't have to just eat sweet potatoes. You can eat sweet potatoes and learn about eating sweet potato leaves. And now it's eating the tuber and the leaves. And that's cultural relevancy, like right there. And something that we're all oftentimes familiar with. But now when you bring in, one, the opportunity to grow, you now have minimized even food waste in that way. Because now instead of saying like, oh, I got to throw out the leaves, or I got to compost them, you've now created another food source.
Totally.
So to me, urban agriculture has created these innovative ways, where it is like pushing tech and seeing how far we can scale production, how can innovation help us create, say, solar production and food production on rooftops. Shout out to urban agrivoltaics, one of the another initiatives that we're looking at. But like, how can all of these things work together? But how can every New Yorker feel like this is a part? And same thing for economic development opportunities, education, from elders to students, intergenerational. Some folks, they're still adults that don't even know where to get food or fresh food. How do we create those opportunities? How do we create jobs so folks feel like agriculture could be a livelihood, whether you're culinary or doing like a business like you have as well? So I'm saying a lot, but all that to say that I still feel like we have a lot to do around connecting food, ag, and climate.
Yeah.
And I think education is important, jobs are important, models. The other thing too, oftentimes when people think of urban agriculture, they think community gardens, which is great. Urban farms, also great. Hydroponic, vertical towers, cool. But what about connecting the need around not just our food access, but climate mitigation, stormwater mitigation, urban heat island? Well, now we need to be looking at different models of urban ag, like food forests, edible food forests, or building our canopy. So we can still support increasing biodiversity. But we can also think about how do we support edible biodiversity. That can be done in controlled environments, and that can be done outside. And then when people aren't as sure about, it's grown in urban areas, it also makes me laugh too, because it makes me think about, where do you actually think your other food comes from? Do you think a tomato is not grown in another field and there aren't roly-polies and worms in there, or a field mouse? All of our nature and natural environments have different, barriers or pests to deal with. Urban agriculture is no different. There are unique qualities that we have to mitigate for, but there's ways to do that.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of innovations and models that can support soil remediation so the soil is healthier, creating healthier soil through composting. All of these innovations, mitigating stormwater and reusing it in different ways, like urban agriculture creates those opportunities right here. And if we're talking about resiliency, to kind of bring it back to that question, to me, it's what I've learned with this work and really trying to bring to the office is resiliency isn't just what your response is to crisis. It can and should also be, what is your infrastructure that you're building for the longer term? And how does that work for you every day, and also then in times of crisis? So it's not a Band-Aid. It really should be a longer term infrastructure approach. And then you're more prepared for crisis. And urban ag is also a way that creates the opportunity for us to be resilient right on. If people know how to grow hyperlocally, even if it's on their windowsill, if and when we have food shortages for whatever reason, climate or otherwise, you know that there's something you can do. If we know about other food access points, CSAs, farmers markets, farm to people, then we know there's other opportunities to access food in our neighborhoods. So you don't always have to necessarily run somewhere else.
I want to double tap on that, because I think I think getting into the distribution of it, like I think there's interest and it all feels like a little bit disparate. Like there's hobbyists, there's urban farmers, there's these ag tech, and this is something that personally is a challenge, is the distribution of it.
Yes.
It's great to say we're going to be ready for a climate disaster, but it's not going to go from 0 to 100. Like we have to build now to have these systems that are ready and to have them be harvesting continuously, to have that food going from harvest to door to plate. How do you see, and how can the Office of Urban Agriculture like help support beyond just the agriculture part of it, the whole sort of getting that food to more people and building the support system for it?
Sure. Yeah, I think that, again, it doesn't speak to just the resiliency, but it's an ecosystem, right, of work. So beyond growing, not all of us are going to be growers. Spoiler alert, I'm not a grower. But we need distribution, we need access, we need jobs. So that kind of goes back to economic opportunity. So to me, urban agriculture also creates the opportunity for hyper-local jobs or even just regional and local jobs that oftentimes people don't see. A lot of times people think community gardens or hobbyist work and what you do is just what you do for fun. And there are some people that that's all they want to do. But the reality is there are a lot of folks that want to have jobs that speak to the ecosystem of the work, like logistics. And to me, urban agriculture creates those opportunities. One, looking at models in a different way, looking at land and underutilized land as opportunities for scaled food production, as well as spaces of healing and respite. We can have both, we should in the city. Also, when you create new models, the other opportunities that come from that, meaning people harvest on a regular basis. How do people prune? So the design, the need for arborists, the need for harvesting, the need for food production, value add.
Totally preserving.
Yeah, same thing with logistics, like you were saying. Now that you're growing it in certain areas, because some are more suited than others, even in our 5 boroughs, how does it get from one place to other? How does it go from wholesale to retail?
Yep.
Those are all also opportunities that not one nonprofit can and should do, not one for business can and should do. And I think what we've seen in our food system is we are resilient when we support a diverse network and web of businesses. And I think oftentimes people do not see the space of urban ag as a place for jobs and opportunity. But I think that there are ways to do that through apprenticeship work, skill-based work, and also encouraging small businesses. And so something that the office also has done is try to identify whether it's in food or wellness or logistics, policy, culinary. One, if we're creating initiatives in the city, are there procurement or contract opportunities for businesses that are experienced to come into the city and provide, right, those resources, products, or services? So looking at food procurement, but also looking at building opportunities for sustainability consultants and culinary chefs and nonprofits around agriculture and other elements. Other things about jobs as well. I think oftentimes we're seen as a city as end consumers on our food system, but we are still not just growing food, but creating markets. We have restaurants, we have other things. So we need to also be able to find a way to get our food and our products out.
Totally. What really inspires me about having folks like you in the Office of Urban Agriculture, in the mayor's office in general, is the fact that you're thinking about the broader picture. And I want to talk a little bit about what you're talking about, because I think public-private collaboration is critical. Being on the private side, I think the public has a lot of ability to shape the future of food and the future of consumption, mostly by creating better food access and better funding for urban ag or rural ag. I also think I know the average age of the U.S. farmer is 65,
right,
and that most of our young urban folks have never been on a farm. So if there's policy through apprenticeships and access to doing this work, can we shift the average age of our farmer to someone younger and tapped in? Just because I want to make sure we get to this, because it's really interesting and it's something that we're working on literally at Farm to People right now. But there are these opportunities for grants for businesses like ours to help get food to the general public, to the city's youth, to the city's elderly. Like there's a ton of RFPs out there that are like, here's what we want. And I think what's been interesting is that the idea of the RFP is one, of course, that I stand by. It's like getting food and usually food access to our youth or our elderly. But what I think is like disconnected and something I'm passionate about, and especially you in your position, but with the collaboration of other offices of the mayor, is like, I don't see a connective tissue between feeding folks the food that could also help support the sort of growers and makers in our local economy. The RFP will be like, can you bring in cut pineapple from a big company from wherever? Or can you bring in beans from wherever? When we have amazing, and it might not be cut pineapple, but we could have applesauce from an upstate New York farm. Like, how do we connect that where it's not just doing good for one or the other, but we have this opportunity as New Yorkers to do good for both ends of the supply and demand side?
Oh, yeah. No, it's a great question. A lot of times people say if it happens in New York, it can happen anywhere. And I think we are still at the cusp of really demonstrating that, meaning there are a lot of great things that we already grow here and nearby. Oftentimes it is a disconnect between RFPs or requests for proposals around procurement, contracts, and even I'm sure you get other requests too when you're doing events and stuff. People are like, I want local, but I would really love this tropical fruit.
Totally.
So, to me, one, it's around understanding and identifying that we have a diverse bounty of legumes, fruit, vegetables, produce, and such, and value-added products in our grasp if we bring it in and we create those opportunities. One, the awareness around those crops. That also then I think speaks to who's growing it, who's producing it, and just the need to continue to demonstrate there's a biodiversity opportunity, but there's also a way to create demand around those products. I think contracts or requests for proposals, procurement is what we're kind of talking about here. Is the disconnect to me is oftentimes the people who are in the agencies are creating procurement contracts on different sets of needs that aren't necessarily intersecting or aware of what is actually available. I think there are also a lot of times, especially with certain contracts, like certain procurement has requirements that speak to the lowest bidder or speak to the lowest cost, which is so ironic because we love competition with everything else except food. But, the reality, and I think I'm preaching to the choir here, is we know that there isn't just a value in getting the lowest cost, the lowest price for something. There is a value in how it's grown, who grew the food, how it was harvested. So from farm workers to laborers to processing to the truckers and to the growers, right? We know that there's a different value. It's very hard sometimes for the city or the state or government, let's just call it government, to quantify that. And to me, what I have found is one of the challenges I'm trying to rise to in the city is demonstrating that there is a way to build more relevant local food procurement contracts that speak to the scale, that speak to the bounty, that speak to what people are already doing now.
Yes.
And that, if that means new contracts, then create new contracts.
Yep.
Not everybody's going to be able to get to the largest bid. That's for the larger players. And again, we already have systems and trucking systems and more blue belts and food coming in from overseas around big food. What we continue to be missing the dots on are our local food map and be connecting those dots. To me, part of that is actual contracts and procurement that are relevant to the scale and the bounty that we have, and also changing what can and should be changed in procurement, whether that's through policy or whether that's just through common sense, because you're building new contracts. So something that the office has been trying to do is show our interagency partners that there are new contracts that could be had, new ag-based contracts, new contracts around land tenure, new long contracts about maintenance, new contracts about procurement. So one in particular is, say, local food and trying to get local food into schools. Mm-hmm. That can be oftentimes a consistent contract for some farmers and producers. Totally. It could be also a pain in the butt with a lot of paperwork. Rightly so, right? You're trying to get everything right. You have to meet I think they create like 850,000 meals a day. So I get it. But sometimes there's a disconnect on what makes sense local and at a certain scale. So one of the things that the office has done in collaboration with our school food partners and partners like Harvest New York is create a small food business training. So we had some state and federal funding to connect that through school food and to say, let's build a training for small food and food hubs. So then we're talking about aggregation, we're talking about logistics, we're also talking about food. And just say, like, if we're looking at school food as the target, how can this information help just demonstrate a more feasible contract or approach? How can we learn from what you're growing? And on the flip side, how can we encourage or challenge you to scale to some of the opportunities that there are, and how can we meet in the middle and make some changes? So these are the things that I felt missing in our local scale, and people were missing the dots. And to me, it's that connective tissue of having the understanding of our local food system, knowing what farmers and producers excel at, what are some of their struggles, and then trying to find ways that the city can meet need, but also know when to make amendments and create opportunities.
Yeah. Well, it's great to have someone like you in office who's pushing this sort of I would call it common sense, and I think it's really around not trying, like, I think it's impossible to do it all at once, but it is also silly not to do any of it ever.
Yes.
And so it's sort of like this somewhere in the middle there, where it's like, of course we want food security, we want people eating food. What can come from local? What could support our local economy beyond the city or even in the city? And I appreciate you highlighting that and pushing that. We only have time for one more quick question, but I think this is like just a fun one for our audience. You know, they're eaters, they're potentially aspiring policy influencers like you were when you got started. You did this as a volunteer to begin, and I think that's wonderful. So what's one tangible action today that they could make to support the future of farming in general?
Okay. Well, oftentimes you'll hear vote with your fork. I would say beyond that, the immediate thing you can do as an individual is support local businesses, farmers, meet them where they're at. If you're able to join a CSA, many of them have sliding scale and accept SNAP. They also some accept health bucks. You know, so if you can buy when you can, buy. If you want to continue to find where opportunities are to people as well, are also those opportunities, right? The direct relationship. Now, when people are saying, what's the next call to action? What can you do together, say, as a community here? Well, I think we're in an interesting time in a campaign season. I think this is the time where people can start putting their principles in connection to the alignment with any race in their platform and people that they're supporting. If you feel like there's things that you want to see together, even talking and exchanging with each other is a way to kind of share that action where it's like, I actually want, when I say I want food in my community, I think I want to support a new urban farm, or, you know, whatever your jam is, there are like-minded people that want to see that. When people think about policy, and I think that's kind of probably in people's mind, and like what action can look like, this is where you have the power of the people to help inform or say, I think this is missing in your platform. You, even current elected, you can reach out to your city council members. I can't tell you to advocate wearing my city hat, but I'm just encouraging folks that there are different avenues where you have a power where people are, you are the constituents, and they are and can and should listen. So the more you're aware and coming to events like this help, the more you're then able to say, I am seeing this in my community and I want to see more of it. Or you can say, I don't see enough of this in my community, I want to see more of it. You can speak to electeds. Also, folks like me in offices, we all say that we do community engagement work. All offices do it in different ways, but that's another way that you can move your voice, your work. And when you do mobilize with other folks, your community, a group, in other groups that you're in, you're then mobilizing your action to go from the individual level to a more like personal level. Then you're mobilizing power. And then lastly, I always encourage people in terms of institutional action. That is a lot harder. That takes a lot more time. It takes a lot more strategy. That's still in the window of time. I know these are a lot of uncharted times that we're feeling in a lot of different ways in our jobs, in our livelihood, where we're able to get food, who used to get us food. These are those times where it's the call to action is, one, to remain the truth teller that you know to be yourself, stay informed. It's two, continuing to mobilize with one another in order to make that voice and that act stronger. So whether it's a policy act, it's an advocacy act, it's a protest act, all forms of resistance are needed now. And then 3, in terms of institutional change, of course, I'm not supposed to tell you to vote, right? But I encourage people, I say I can't encourage people to advocate. So I do encourage people to vote. I do encourage people to use their power, and you don't have to wait to vote. I think we're in an interesting time with different campaigns, but I also think right now an act can be growing, an act could be supporting a business, an act could be learning more and reaching out and informing your neighbor as well.
Well, thank you, Qiana, for engaging with our community here at Farm to People tonight. I think it's super important and to hear an inside view into the world of policy is not something we get to experience every day. So thank you again for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Know Your Food, a podcast from Farm to People. If today's conversation got you thinking differently about what's on your plate or where it comes from, we'd love if you shared this episode with a friend or left us a review. It helps more people discover the folks reimagining the future of food from the ground up. And if you're in the New York tri-state area, you can shop from our network of small, regenerative, independent farms and makers at farmtopeople.com and stay in the loop by signing up for our newsletter or joining us on Instagram at farmtopeople. Until next time, eat well and know your food.